Laurie Joan Swick. I write historical novels about women whose contributions to the religions of the world I feel have been undervalued and underappreciated. And I think if we go back in history and read between the lines of what's been handed down to us, and start really looking at what women actually did and said and started, we get a whole new appreciation for how important women were in the history of the world's religions and eventually in the history of the world's cultures. That being said, in this episode, I am excited to talk to you about what mysticism actually is. I think it's a term that is used a lot these days, but I don't think most people really understand what it is. So I want to talk about the history of mysticism, if you will, and the importance of mysticism and the true nature of mysticism. And in doing so, I'm going to celebrate the life of Rabia of Basra, who was a mystic, a Sufi Muslim mystic who lived in 8th century our time, 1st century of Muslim time. Muhammad started time over after he moved Islam to Mecca. So she lived in the 1st century. She was an early mystic and may well have been the first in the Muslim tradition. So I want to talk about her. But first, again, I want to really explore what mysticism is and what it is not. What prompted my interest in this and in doing this presentation, and have to take a step aside to share this with you. I like to art journal. I find it very meditative. I find it very spiritual, if you will. It's kind of a mystical experience for me. I get in a trance and I'm just really express myself. I did an earlier blog on it if you'd like to read more about that. But for now, what I want to share is that it's a very time-consuming process. And when I don't have time to take out all my big art, padded journals and all my art supplies and my collage supplies and my watercolors and everything that I love to use, I just make quick little, and if I really need to journal, I really need that outlet. I make quick little sticker, if you will, collages, art journaling in my regular journal that I write in. Here's just an example kind of what I do. Different things. Sometimes I write in them, but anyway, it's quick and it's easy and you can kind of get it out of your system if you need to do it. But because of this, I'm always on the lookout for stickers that have something to do with me or what I'm interested in, or eclectic, interesting things I can have fun with. It's a very emotional experience, so I try to find interesting books of stickers with things that might speak to whatever I might be feeling. And so I was searching on Amazon one day for some good stickers for art journal stickering, and I found one on mysticism. It's images that had to do with mystical images, and so I thought, wow, that's for me. So I ordered it, and I got it, and it's a lovely little book, and and I use it. It's got some fun, really good stickers in it, but it had a lot of things in it like black cats and cauldrons and broomsticks and books of spell books and things of that nature that really aren't mysticism, to be honest about it. But I realized, in paying attention to how the word was being bantered about in the modern world, that most people do assume anything that's occult or kind of metaphysical in any way with being a mystical experience, and that's not the true nature of what mysticism is. So to define what mysticism is, I'm going to read a little bit from the Bible that I grab for when it comes to mysticism by Evelyn Underhill. She's a woman who lived in the late 19th, early 20th century, who mystic herself. She's from England. She was a novelist. She wrote a lot, but she wrote a lot about mysticism, and she's probably the first person who really did a lot of research on mystical technique and what mysticism is from across the world's religions. And I am going to focus my next vlog, if you will, in June on Evelyn Underhill. So I will say more about her because she definitely deserves that. But I do want to share with you how she defines mysticism, and I think this makes it pretty clear. What do we know about what do we really mean by mysticism? Underhill says it's a word which is impartially applied to the performance of mediums and the ecstasies of the saints to mentaculture, sorcery, dreamy poetry, and medieval art, to prayer and palmistry. But that's not what mysticism is, she says. She says, mysticism in its pure form is a science of ultimates, the science of union with the absolute and nothing else. So, mysticism is the practice of joining yourself with the divine in a very dramatic way. And many times, the way that it's explained, by mystics who experience it, it's a very intimate relationship with God, with the divine, with the ultimate, whatever one perceives to be ultimate spirit or godly. In Rabia's case, it would be Allah, of course. But it's the joining of the self to the absolute, to the everything in such a dramatic way. It's often expressed as if it's a very, almost even an erotic experience, but it's definitely an intimate experience. Um, it's some mystics explain it as annihilating the self to be one with God or one with the other. This sounds austere, and maybe it is, but it's not. It's very similar to like in Buddhism when you finally reach nirvana and you break the cycle of rebirth. Nirvana actually means blowing out. It has to do with extinguishing the self so that you can become part of the absolute. Uh, and as it, I like to explain this in a way that was explained to me by a Hindu mystic and an adept. And I really love this explanation, and I hope this resonates with you as it did with me. If you imagine that you yourself are a drop of water and you somehow get spilled into the ocean, you become one with the ocean, okay? Do you lose your personal essence as the drop of water? No, it becomes absorbed into the whole ocean. You gain the essence of the whole ocean. That becomes you. So it's a feeling of like becoming one with everything in a very organic, very free, expansive way. Okay. This is the mystical experience. I'm sure many of you have had it. In our culture, we don't discuss these things very often, as perhaps we should. But if you have, I hope you'll leave a comment and share as much as you're comfortable sharing about that. And we can talk about it more later. But anyway, that's kind of the essence of what real mysticism is. Now, to talk about Rabia of Basra as being an initiating mystic, she lived in, as I said, the early 8th century. Her birth date is around 714. Nobody's really sure. In Islam time, this is about the year 91 to 95 when she was born, the first century. She died when she was in her 80s. They said she died a virgin. This is stipulated in the writings about her that have been passed down to us. This will become more evident later, the significance of this. But she was a fourth born, and Rabia, her name means fourth, so that's why she was named Rabia. She was the fourth daughter to a peasant family. They were well respected, but they were poor in Syria. Her parents died when she was very young. She was separated from her sisters. She was kidnapped and sold into slavery. Nobody knows exactly when, but she was still very young. She was purchased by a master who is unnamed, but he was a male. And it is said in the writings about her that he worked her very hard, whatever that means. Now, in other writings, we are told that she was incredibly beautiful. One cannot imagine that if an elderly man wanted to buy a slave to work them hard, it wouldn't be a young, very attractive woman. So we have to suspect there might have been some sexual abuse in there. But of course, that's not recorded, so we can't know that for sure. But he worked her very hard. She started praying to Allah. Her beautiful poetry and prayer are one and the same in ancient writings, and more can be said about that. And I'm sure I will, because I like both. But the story about how she was freed is that she was on her mat praying, and her master was looking in on her somehow. Don't ask me why. But anyway, she's on her mat praying to God, and he overhears her and he's watching her. And she's saying, "Oh God, I would do nothing but just love you all the time and serve you so much better, except you put me into the hands of this master, and I must do what this creature asks of me," and so many words. And she's praying and praying. Well, while her master is, reportedly watching her pray, he sees a light over her head, like a lantern, a really bright light, which is not being suspended from a wire or anything. It's just a light hanging by itself over her head. So all of a sudden he's like, "Oh gosh, God really is talking to this young girl, and she really is involved with God." And so, according to the stories, he went and sat up all night and worried and worried and worried. And in the morning, he thought, "I better let this one go." So he calls her in. And instead, he treated her kindly and told her that she was no longer his slave. And if she wanted to stay with him, he would serve her. If she wanted to leave, she could. Well, she left. Who could blame her? And she went out into the desert. And according to some stories, she lived in a very small house, very very humble. She would drink water out of a jar with a crack in it, and she didn't expect anything better. She slept on a mat with a brick for a pillow. But she became really well known for her love of God and just this pure mystical experience that she had with God. And it was what sustained her. And according to some stories, somebody came and said, "Look, I have some connections. Somebody's wealthy. I'm going to ask them to give me some money to help you, improve your living conditions here." And she was just like, "Oh, what do I want with that? No, please don't bother me. I don't have time. I'm too busy loving God, loving Allah." And somebody else came and said they were going to buy her a new dress or get dresses for her. Or somebody did bring them, and she said, "Oh, I don't want that. I don't have time for that. I just need to stay on my mat and to pray to God." But she did practice as a Muslim, her throughout her life because we see snippets of her life where she's traveling to Mecca to obviously make the Hajj, the pilgrimage there. Uh, but she fasted, she practiced asceticism. People from all over, men came and learned from her. She was definitely one of the first instructors of Sufism, if nothing else. There is one wild story that came down to us about a young man from Iran who went to Basra when she was there, and he was going around town asking everybody, what's there to do in Basra, and he's just making conversation, and everybody he meets says, "Oh, you're new here. Well, you need to go over to the brothel and meet Rabia." And so, according to this particular story, she was actually in a brothel. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But as the story goes on, and what this is significant about is showing what the attitudes were about her, the different attitudes during her life. But so many people insisted he go see her that he finally did. And it said he went in and he paid a madam, he paid a woman to pass through, and he was taken to Rabia's room, and he sat and waited for over an hour while she prayed with her back to him. And when she finally turned around, he's thinking, "Oh, I'm finally going to get some action." But she talks to him and she tells him about her love of Allah and and the nature of it. And they end up talking through the night. And by morning, of course, he is, no sex was shared, but he is becoming a mystic himself. But just her influence, in these ancient texts that we have written by men, usually that don't highlight anybody but men in all the traditions, not just in the Islamic tradition, she was so well respected that they had to like share these stories about her and talk about her, just her mystical experiences. They did the same thing in stories about Rabia, like I talked about in last month's vlog about Cecilia of Rome and the ancient Christian virgin martyrs. They stress their virginity throughout, okay? Despite austere circumstances, they always remain virgins. This is important in history. A woman's, if a woman's reproductive system isn't, controlled by men, then they're not quite sure what to do with her, and she sure can't be a spiritual adept. But also they made her. They said, well, she was like a man. They made her over into like saying she took on manly qualities, and the inference here is that you have to be a man in order to be spiritually wise and deep. And these are the sort of things that have been handed down through history, and it's not just endemic to these two traditions. This has kind of been done throughout the history of the world's religions. But Rabia was important, and from my perspective about women's initiative in world history, some of the ways in which she was a forerunner, in which she paved the way for other people, and especially for other women. She was the first in the Muslim tradition to introduce the idea, as far as we know, as far as what's extant, the first to really express mystical union with Allah, with God, as loving God, not because scriptures tell you to, not because you're afraid if you don't, you're going to hell, not because if you think if you do, you'll be rewarded and go to heaven, but just loving God for the sake of loving God, for the experience, the mystical experience of being one with God. That was enough for her. And she was the first one in this tradition to teach this. Now, I mentioned Macrina. Um, in the Christian tradition, the Eastern Christian, early Christian tradition, in my last vlog, and she did this too. Actually, a couple hundred years before Rabia would have, about 400 years before, because she was in the 400s. She had a very mystical, deep mystical experience with Jesus, which is kind of a little different in character because for obvious reasons, and I'm sure I'll discuss that more in the future too. She wasn't the first mystic ever, but she was the first one in the Muslim tradition to really have it changed the dynamic of how one loves God, and it's very dramatic. When you're in that actual relationship, instead of looking up to a father, if you will, and feeling like, oh, I have to make my daddy proud, and being afraid of what happens if you don't. The dynamic's very different in that sort of a relationship with God than it was with Rabia. Hers was more like a mutual lover, and this resonates throughout the mysticism of the world. God is spoken of more in terms of being a lover that one has a very dramatic union with, that often ends up sounding a lot like, an erotic sexual union. But Underhill is very quick to say that is symbolic, and people who take that at face value and think that these people actually think they're having sex with God, are not understanding what's going on at all. And I'll discuss that more when I in my next vlog about Underhill. But what Rabia did, okay, she was the first one in the Muslim tradition to say God should be loved for God's sake. She's the first in a long line of Sufi mystics, and she may well have been the first Sufi mystic, male or female, as far as we have records. A woman by the name of Jessica Monte did her senior thesis on Rabia's importance to women today, especially to Muslim women. I want to just show you the cover. Because this is the one painting of Rabia that we have that in circulation, and when you look her up, this is the one that you see. She's beautiful and humble and sitting outside of her home, wherever it ended up. Uh, but anyway, her thesis, her main thing she's saying is uh, that the importance of Rabia is for women today, especially Muslim women, to get a sense of female spiritual power. And she thinks that Rabia was probably the real forerunner, the person who gave baraka, if you will, or blessings that could be translated into spiritual power for women. As far as we know, she was the first of the Sufi teachers from what's been recorded. But she was definitely one of the most influential on whether or not she was actually first. So her initiative is really important. She changed the dynamic of love of God in a way that had less to do with being subject to systematized religion, and for this reason, the Sufis throughout history at times have been oppressed, by those who were in the traditional religion, and it's a very different dynamic. She also, what we know about Rabia, as I said, was mostly from writings about men. We see the parallels with the early virgin martyrs in saying that, a woman can only be holy and spiritual if she becomes a man, that she can only be spiritual if she never had sex, because, and you never hear this in the stories about the male mystics and the male saints. It really doesn't matter if they've had sex or not, but women better not if they want to be holy. But the significance for us, uh, we're looking at these stories now, the way they were recorded. These people throughout history, these men who recorded stories about Rabia, realized she was important enough to share, and to discuss, and they couldn't write her out of history, and they couldn't write her significance out of the history of Muslim Sufi mysticism, if you will. Uh, but what was left out is her real experience. What was her real experience like? And for her to have gone through all of these things and not have been raped, or used sexually is, I mean, it's not realistic to assume that didn't happen. It leaves out her real story. It leaves out her real experiences. When we look at this, we miss the triumphs and tribulations of what women's lives were really like when they became spiritually adept. What did she go through? It leaves out the cultural treatment of women at their time. Their spirituality, did it come out of a place of pain? Did it come out of a place of darkness? Where did it come from? And how did they get to that? In Rabia's life, being sold into slavery when she was very young, her mysticism, was probably an escape from the realities of her real life, but the realities of what that was like don't get discussed that here. And when we don't see women's real experience, we don't try to go back and look at what we know about women and recreate that, it leaves it leaves a spiritual part of being a person out of a woman's experience. When we go through different stages in our life, we experience menarche. We, as things especially for a woman's life, we have children. We become mothers. We go through menopause. Many, many different things in between. All this is left out of history. And I think you'll have to agree that because of that, even in culture today, a lot of this stuff isn't discussed. Okay. Most of us as women don't know what to expect with any of these things really till we go through it because it just isn't dealt with as being an important part of the human life and experience. So I think we need to go back and look at the text and see what women are really doing and what they can tell us about who they are and who we are as women. And we need to celebrate, be able to use our spirituality to celebrate the stages of a woman's life, to ritualize it in a way that shows how sacred it is and what a wonderful thing it is. Indigenous religions are much better at this actually than most of the world's organized religions. But anyway, that's my shtick on why I think Rabia is so important for us today. And I think there's women have a woman by the name of Margaret Smith has gone back and recreated her life for women today. Another woman, a Muslim woman whose name I can't remember right now, but she did write a novel about Rabia. Um, Jessica Monte's book is really good, but if you get a chance, I hope you look into her life and she's charming, she's wise, she's clever. If you read what she wrote, I think you'll fall in love with her like I have. So let me wrap things up by doing my commercial. I'm proud to say my new book, The Sculptor and the Saint, about the life of Saint Cecilia of Rome, hit the number one on the Amazon bestseller list in six, count them, different categories. Uh, Biographical literary fiction, historical literary fiction, ancient historical fiction, Renaissance historical fiction, mystery, thriller, and suspense literary fiction, which was a mystery to me, but I'm glad it happened, biographical fiction. So I hope you get a chance to, get yourself a copy and read it. And if you like it, please leave me a review on Amazon and Goodreads. Um, and that would mean a lot to me. But anyway, my May vlog, if you want to join me next month, as I said, will be about how to actually become a mystic. So if you believe you've had mystical experiences or have a proclivity towards mysticism, I think you'll really enjoy it. I want to talk about Evelyn Underhill. I think you'll be quite amazed by her, and you'll wonder why you haven't heard very much about her before, because she's a big deal in the world of spirituality. She definitely is very, very intelligent, very intense, very spiritual, and I think you'll love learning more about her. And she also did go through and see there are definite patterns in mystics' lives in how they became mystics and how they practice their mysticism, different characters about it. She also talks about something that she calls creative ecstasy, that mystics, when they're actually in the mystical experience, can create in a state of ecstasy, union with the divine, can create amazing artworks or do automatic writing. They can write things that God is telling them. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, probably in my next vlog in July. But anyway, tune in for that if you get a chance. But I want to wrap this up by reading a poem slash prayer written by Rabia, that I think really shows the true nature of what her mystical relationship with Allah was. Oh, my happiness and my desire and refuge too, and my friend and my sustainer and my goal. Oh, my beloved, longing for you sustains me. If it wasn't for you, my friend, life of my soul, I'd have been mad on the earth wherever I was. Such gifts, grace you gave to make me whole. Your love is now my only desire and bliss, and is known to the heart's eye thirsting, like my soul. I've none but you, who makes deserts bloom. You're my joy deep inside me, whom I extol. I am now bound to you my whole life through. In the blackness of my eyes, you are an aureole. And so, if you are satisfied with me, well then, oh my heart's desire, my joy has become whole. Thanks very much. Peace and grace.